Hey guys, hello and welcome to episode 5 of season 5, I believe. We're on the old 5-5 now. Right, yeah. So last episode, I'm actually back on schedule now. Wonderful. Last episode, we were starting the Class A versus Class B whole situation. Or I think it might have been the episode before that we started. Yeah, sorry. I watched both of those episodes on the same day, so it kind of melded into one big episode in my mind. But we did a Class A versus Class B. We saw Shinzo, Tsuyu, Kirishima, Kamiyami. Who the fuck is that? For some reason, the name of the electric guy is escaping my mind right now. I'm so bad with names. Kaminari, I believe. Um, and the guy who can speak to animals, whose name I also forget. I'm terrible at names. You will learn this about me. I am awful with names. But we saw their team get through. But we also got a really nice showcase of Class B as well. Like, they weren't any pushovers by any means. But yeah, I'm expecting this episode to be somewhat of a montage episode. If I had to take a guess, just a guess, I'd say this episode is probably going to cover fights 2 through 4. So those three, like 2 through 4, those three fights, and then it'll probably finish off with a cliffhanger leading into the final fight between Deku's team and Shinzo's team. That would be my guess. But yeah, I might as well just get into it, right? There's not really much to theorize about. One thing I forgot to mention in my discussion for last episode, Shinzo and Monoma on the same team. That is a powerful combination. Those two together in a powerful team, not only because you can have two people using the same ability, but also because since Shinzo can replicate people's voices, the ability to replicate Monoma's voice could play into some mind games regarding whether or not he's replicated the power or not, that kind of thing, allowing Monoma to because Shinzo can replicate Monoma's voice, right? Which means that even if Monoma doesn't actually have the power, people can be tricked into thinking he does. So Monoma can go and take someone else's power, for example, I don't know, Deku's. That would be crazy, but geez, that would actually be really bad. But yeah, he could take someone's power without them people realizing, and then Shinzo would replicate Monoma's voice and be like, "Oh, Monoma still has Shinzo's power. Okay, but that means it's safe to move in on him and attack because he only has Shinzo's power. He doesn't have any other quirks going on." But then, boom! Turns out it was just a trick. Monoma actually does have someone's quirk lurking in him, and he was just pretending the whole time. You get what I mean? There's tons of mind games that can be played. Monoma touching. I still feel like I'm saying his name wrong for some reason. Monoma touching Deku is a scary prospect, not because of how powerful it would make him, but because of how dangerous the power is. Like, Deku had to train for 10 months just so his body wouldn't explode using the power. Like, Monoma touching him could actually be a threat to Monoma's life. Like, honestly, that could. And that does make me wonder, like, if one for all if One for All has this kind of quality about it where it's passed down from person to person and they're all linked together kind of in a paths kind of situation, does Monoma touching Deku allow him to tap into that same thing? Like, would he be part of the One for All, like, lineage by replicating the power, or would he have his own completely distinct One for All power? But since One for All includes the ability to pass down the quirk, could Monoma replicate the quirk himself and then using the replicated quirk pass the quirk down to someone else? Because if the ability to pass on quirks is within the One for All power and he replicates the power, theoretically he could replicate the power and then pass the quirk onto someone, right? And then replicate the power again and pass it on to someone, replicate the power again, and just create like a whole army of One for All users. Is there anything stopping that? Because if the power to pass on the power is included in the quirk, then Monoma would also get that quirk by replicating the power, right? And as far as we know, they haven't put any limitations on replicating the power other than the fact that you can only use one at a time. That's the only limitation we've seen so far. But of course, that would require Monoma to actually know what the power is and how it works, which he wouldn't, of course. I'm just saying, hypothetically, would he be able to do that? It does make me wonder. But yeah, let's not spend all the day theorizing, right? Let's get into the episode. I want to see it, and it's already kind of late in the day. I need to start waking up early so I can watch these episodes when they actually come out. So yeah, let's get into it. Alright, so that was episode 5 of Season 5 of My Hero Academia. Really fun little episode. This seems to be a very character-focused episode, which makes sense, actually. I mean, yeah, actually, it makes a lot of sense now that I think about it, right? Because that's kind of what this show's been doing for a long time, where it's kind of been slowly building up this big cast of characters, right? So season 1, it was very much like Deku and Bakugo, right? And All Might and a little bit of Aizawa. Then season 2, we got a bit of focus on the side characters, but it was still mainly focused on like the main group, like Ida and Todoroki. Then kind of season 3 to season 4 is where we really started to get a better look at the side characters. You know, we got a bit of a look at Class B, we got a bit of a look at all these other guys in more detail, and now it's really culminating where we're getting these individual episodes focused on these side characters, and it's fun. I like it. It's great that this is a show where you can have an entire episode dedicated to a side character, and you're invested and enjoying it the whole time, you know? And that's the thing when it comes to like side characters and stuff, is that like they don't need to have some super complicated multifaceted arc that covers 300 chapters. You know, sometimes you just look, okay, we have 10 side characters, we're gonna give them each something to do, some path to go down and develop kind of as the story progresses, and it just makes them feel a bit more alive, right? Tokoyami is hardly the most complicated and investing character in the whole series, but they give him something to do, they give him a little some challenges to overcome, they give him some story, some development, and it makes him way more interesting than he would be if he was just some cool guy who had weird shadow powers. And I appreciate that. I appreciate they do. You know, characters like Tokoyami, like Momo, like Kirishima, characters who don't really get the spotlights and aren't main characters, whose main role is usually to help out in the conflict, but ultimately not save the day or anything. It's nice that they get their little moments to shine and their moments to develop and show off. It's great. It's great to see that kind of stuff. And, you know, it makes sense. Characters like Kirishima have kind of already had their moments in the spotlight in regards to their big moments of development. So at the moment, they're taking a bit of a backseat to these other characters. And I think that's nice, especially Class B, because Class B, while they've been a presence since Season 2, they haven't really done anything of note in terms of, like, actually having a bit of a spotlight on them. A few of them got some in Season 3, like Kendo, for example, like Tetsu. You know, some of them got a little bit here and there, but not a huge amount, so it's nice to see this. And this Class A versus Class B is actually a perfect opportunity to do that. Again, like I talked about a couple episodes ago, My Hero Academia loves to throw characters who are good guys onto the... Good guys? Why didn't I put that in quotation marks? It likes to throw characters who are good guys into an antagonistic role in order to develop them. It loves doing that. It did it with Bakugo in Season 1, and Aizawa in Season 1 to an extent. It did it with Todoroki in Season 2. It did it with Bakugo again in Season 3, having him fight Deku. You know, it did it with Shinzo in Season 2. This show loves taking the good guys and putting them in antagonistic roles against Deku, and in doing that allows us to see what they're capable of, kind of give them some development. And again, it's doing it again here. Class A versus Class B. Class A gets development because where, you know, there are characters we're seeing them improve and develop their powers, but Class B is being put in an antagonistic role at the moment, and through that we're getting to see them kind of compete against our guys and learn about them through that. For example, this shadow guy in this episode, whose name I forget. I'm probably never going to remember the name of most Class B characters because I'm so bad at remembering names. They're placed, they're contrasted against characters on our side, and through that we get to see what they're capable of, you know? This Shadow dude, he's not exactly the most complicated or in-depth character ever seen or anything like that, but by putting him against Tokoyami, it gives him just a bit more character that he wouldn't have had if it was just a quick little montage, you know what I mean? And now that I'm thinking about it, I went into this episode expecting it to very much be kind of like a montage type thing where we'd get 3 fights in one episode and then set up to the Shinzo Deku episode, which would be next. But that doesn't seem to be how it's going at all. It seems as though we're going to be paying attention to these fights, really getting some spotlight on these characters who normally wouldn't get the spotlight. And you know what? I'm fine with that. I like that, actually, that we're getting this opportunity to really learn the characters, because by learning about the characters now, it means you need to spend less time learning about them later, if that makes sense. For example, let's say the shadow guy, again, whose name I forget, ends up playing a more important role in, like, 2 arcs from now, right? Like maybe he actually shows up and helps fight a villain or something like that, right? We don't need to spend time giving him character then, right? And being like, oh, we're introducing this character who's going to be important. Let's quickly give him some character right now. You don't need to do that because it's already been set up here, right? You can have this arc to set up the characters, like, okay, this is what the characters are about, this is what they believe, this is how they act, this is what their powers are. And then if you want to introduce them later into the story and have them be more active later, you don't need to waste time later doing all of that because it's already been done now, right? You're setting up your pieces and you're allowing yourself to use them when you want to rather than having to set them up in the moment, right? You get what I'm trying to say here? Yeah, you get what I'm trying to say. You get what I'm trying to say. Like, they're doing all of this now so they can save time later when having these people have a character is potentially a bit more important, right? So yeah, we got a little bit of at the aftermath of the last match. We got a specific look at Shinzo, Tsuyu, however the hell you pronounce her name, and Kirishima. It was mentioned that Tsuyu and Kirishima were a lot more critical of their actions, which makes sense. They have lots of experience in actual combat, especially last season where they played key roles against the mob, against the Yakuza. So from their perspective, it's from the perspective of the students, it's like, oh, rats, we failed, that sucks. Oh no, 2 of our teammates got captured, oh well. But from their perspective, it's like, 2 of our teammates got captured. If this was an actual fight, they would be dead right now. It's like Kirishima said, he got grabbed and he's even said to himself, literally, if this was a real fight, I'd be dead. Which is true. This training is great because it allows you to face those consequences. It allows you to make those mistakes and learn from them, right? It's the classic thing about learning. Everyone's like, oh no, everyone's so worried about making mistakes. That's literally the point, right? You make mistakes to learn from them. If you're sparring, right? If you're having a little practice fight and sparring, and you dodge to the left and someone hits you with a hook because you weren't really paying attention. Well, it's good that you learned that here instead of an actual fight, because if it was an actual fight, you'd be knocked the fuck out right now. It's good that you learned not to make that mistake in sparring. You get what I mean? Like, it's good to make these mistakes in training, and because they have experienced actual combat where the consequences are very real, they can apply that to the training. Like, damn, if this had happened to me during the actual battle rather than during this training, I'd be dead right now. And that's a terrifying thought. And I need to work to make sure I don't make those kinds of mistakes anymore. Because if you make that mistake in combat, you don't have time to learn to fix that mistake because you're fucking dead. And Shinzo as well is having a similar but kind of different problem. Kirishima and Tsuyu have experienced actual combat, and they're making mistakes in training, and they're taking those mistakes very seriously because they understand the consequences of making those mistakes in actual combat. Shinzo, on the other hand, has never really been in actual combat. He hasn't had much experience battling or anything like that. He's done lots of training, presumably with Aizawa. Maybe not, but presumably with Aizawa, he's done lots of training. But in the actual battle, he said he wasn't able even to use 1/10 of it. That's what he said. He was barely able to use it, which, again, makes perfect sense, right? It's a classic thing. It's something you hear a lot about in combat sports. Again, it should be a fucking meme at this point. I always bring up MMA and combat sports, but a lot of things apply to it. All right, it makes a lot of sense. But it's something you hear about in combat sports all the time, where people will be fucking amazing in sparring. Like, they'll be sparring, and it's like they're unbeatable. It's like, it's ridiculous. They're so good in sparring, but then they go into an actual fight, and it's like they're maybe like 30% as good as they are in sparring, because when you have that pressure of a real fight, when you have the consequences, it can cause all kinds of things. It can cause you to freeze up and not be as experimental as you would be in sparring. It could cause you to kind of stress out, and stress is a very real physical thing which releases lactic acid, and causes fatigue. It's not, stress isn't just a feeling, it's a physical thing that happens and actually physically tires you out. All kinds of things that happen where it's like, you can spend years learning in the training room and being a goddamn murderer in sparring in the training room, but unless you have an actual fight, you're not going to know how you're going to do in an actual fight because the situation's so different. And that's the problem Shinzo is facing right now. He is probably very skilled in his training, but in an actual fight, he makes mistakes, he slips up, he freezes up, he doesn't use the full extent of his abilities, he makes errors. And though he ultimately did get the win, and the win was very largely due to him and his abilities helping out a lot, it is still a reality that he has very little experience in actual combat, and he's going to need that experience, because as skilled as he may be, there's a very big difference between using that skill in a safe, friendly, like, training environment versus an actual competition where you're competing to win, versus actual battle with life and death, right? Like, if Shinzo is, again, it's the same thing with Tsuyu and Kirishima. It's good that they're making their mistakes here because they can learn from them. Now that he's in actual combat, he's not able to utilize everything that he learned, because it's not that simple, right? It's not as simple as just... I'd compare it to, like, speed running, almost, where, like, if you practice a speed run, you can pull off all the tricks and do all the amazing, wonderful stuff and do these great runs. But then when you actually sit down and attempt a speed run, it's like, all of a sudden your fingers are made out of fucking butter. You can't do anything. All those tricks you could do 10 times in a row before, suddenly you can't pull off, you know? It's just that pressure and that feeling you get when it's actually time to go, where it's like, even though I know I can do this stuff, I can't do it because the pressure and the situation is so much more different, right? So it's good that Shinzo is experiencing this, because it will allow him to grow, right? But even then, it's limited because he hasn't experienced actual combat yet. It comes in steps, right? He needs to learn to be able to utilize this in training first, right? To learn how to do it. And then from there, he advances to stuff like this, which would be the equivalent of sparring, right? Where you're practicing with teammates and you learn to utilize those skills in actual combat. And then from there, you learn to utilize it in actual combat, where there are very real life or death stakes. So this is a great learning experience for Shinzo. And hopefully we get to see him growing from this, right? Even as close as the next fight, hopefully we get to see him growing from this. After that, we get into the next team battle, which is Team Momo versus Team Kendo. Momo and Kendo kind of set up as like little friendly rivals, which is great, you know, pushing each other to improve. It's always good to have a little rival, a friendly rivalry where you can improve by pushing yourself to beat this person. And for Kendo, that's a very good thing, right? Her power isn't quite as amazing as Momo's, but as long as she has someone to consider kind of a rival to her, then that's great. It'll help her develop. But the star of this episode was obviously Tokoyami, whose name I hope to God I'm saying correctly. We finally got to see what happened when he did his time with Hawks. And of course, he got irritated at first when Hawks was like, oh, I wanted a bird guy on my team. But yeah, it seemed pretty obvious that wasn't the only reason why he was chosen, right? That seemed pretty clear. And what he saw was unrealized potential in Tokoyami. And Tokoyami, although he was frustrated at first, once he realized Hawks' true goals, he was able to kind of use that as motivation to get better and improve. And he came up with a new technique, Dark Fallen Angel, I believe it was called, flight, where he can use Dark Shadow to fly, which, yeah, again, makes perfect sense. Like, yeah, of course he'd be able to use Dark Shadow to fly. Dark Shadow can fly, and he's a physical thing. Yeah, of course he can do that, right? It makes perfect sense that he can do that, right? I don't know why I didn't even think of that before. That's one of the things I really like about the powers in this show. Something I really appreciate is how they have the powers and they set up rules for the powers, and then they build on the powers in ways that make sense. Kaminari has electric powers where electric goes out in all directions. Okay, well, if he fires a conductor, then the electricity will move towards the conductor. Makes perfect sense, right? Makes perfect sense. And you have Bakugo, right? His power is his sweat explodes. Pretty simple. In the hands of someone less intelligent, they'll just go boom, 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 just blow a bunch of stuff up. But no, he's thinking of clever ways to use it. He uses it to move around in the air. He focuses it and he causes the explosions in different ways in order to create different effects, almost like little lasers and rapid fire and all this kind of different stuff. And now Tokoyami, right, who is utilizing Dark Shadow in new and creative ways, but it's not out of nowhere. All of it is stuff you could come up with if you just spend some time thinking, okay, if I had this power, how could I use it? You know, it's like, yeah, of course Tokoyami would be able to fly. Of course Kaminari would be able to use a conductor to direct his electricity. Of course Bakugo could probably manipulate explosions in different ways, right? It all makes sense within the realms of the powers, and I really appreciate that. None of them are like ass pulls where it's like, oh, Tokoyami, oh my god, it turns out he can create a light shadow that creates light powers. Oh, I didn't even realize. It's like, no, he's not doing, like, no. They establish what his power is. They don't change what his power is. It has a set of rules, and he creates new, he utilizes it in new ways based on those rules. They don't just pull new stuff out of their asses like, oh, Tokoyami can create a dark mist out of nowhere that shrouds everything and poisons people. It's like, no. that's not how it works. He has this power, this is how he uses it, and we can use it in more creative ways by not bending, but by within these rule sets we can kind of utilize it in a bunch of different creative ways. I like it. Like, covering himself like armor makes sense, right? Using it to fly makes sense. It all makes sense within the rules that have been established, and I appreciate that. I feel like the Invisible Girl would definitely be a good counter to the Shadow guy, because she can do that thing, can't she, where she's like a flashbang and she sends light out everywhere. That would probably be a good way to keep the Shadow Boy kind of away at a distance by removing the shadows, right, by flashing everything. But next episode it seems we're going to get more of a focus on the Mushroom Girl. I want to see what the manga-looking guy is capable of. The one with, like, paper for a head. I want to see what he can do, because, I mean, he has a piece of paper for a head. Like, what is that? Like, I'm thinking he's going to have some mental power, like he can draw something and it'll become real, or something mental like that, right? But yeah, it seems like this fight's going to continue next episode, which I'm looking forward to. I'm curious how long this arc's going to take, because it seems like it's taking longer than I was originally expecting it to, but hey, if we're getting some nice character stuff out of it, that's not so bad, right? But yeah, that was episode 5. It was a fun episode with some nice character stuff, but ultimately, in terms of discussion, there's not really much to talk about other than what I've already covered. I don't think. I am curious to see how many Class B will win, because, I mean, it's 5 fights, right? So it's unlikely Class A is going to win every single one of them, unless it's a thing where Class B does lose all of them, and that acts as motivation for them as characters moving forward or something like that. But I am interested to see how many fights each side wins. But yeah, that's just speculation at that point. So yeah, I'm looking forward to the next episode, but that's about everything I have to say about this one. So yeah, thank you all very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed as much as I did, and I'll see you for the next episode. Bye-bye.